show you fucking nasty.
Welcome back, YouTube. Today I'm going to be upgrading the chassis on the Traxxas Nitro Sport. I'm going to be using the Rustler chassis, which is an all aluminum chassis, and there are a few other parts that you need to do this conversion. So let's take a quick look at the stock Nitro setup, and then we'll look at the parts you need to do the conversion. So as you can see on the bottom, this is the Nitro Sport. The aluminum comes up about halfway and then it's plastic. And the upgrade from the Rustler is an all aluminum chassis like this. But you need more than just the chassis to do this conversion. So you'll need the chassis. You will need the Nitro Rustler fuel tank holder. You will also need the upper deck and the steering rack, servo linkage, and the servo horn. You may be able to use the servo horn off of the Sport, but I actually got this assembly on eBay, so it came with everything all ready to go. Last but not least, you will also need the turnbuckle set from Traxxas, 1937. These are the links that run from the rack down to the spindle on the tire, or on the wheel here. So I'll go over some part numbers real quick. This is the fuel tank holder, 4432. This is the exploded view of the upper deck, 4431. This is the exploded view of the chassis. The chassis part number is 4430. And then this is the exploded view of the steering system. So it has all of your steering components for the rack. These are the 54mm turnbuckles you need. If you'd like to see these diagrams, just go to www.traxxas.com, click on support, then click on Nitro Rustler, and then scroll to the bottom and click on exploded views. What I would recommend doing is, instead of trying to get all of these parts individually here, try to get an assembly, and currently they are available on eBay. Like I said, I got this entire assembly here for like 22 bucks. It also came with this, so this was like a complete assembly. And then I also got the chassis for ridiculously cheap. It was like $3 and $5 shipping for the chassis, so it was relatively inexpensive. So let's go ahead and start the conversion. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to try to do is basically separate the two pieces of the chassis. So I'm going to separate this plastic piece from this aluminum piece down here. And the way I'm going to go about this is I'm going to pop off the servo horn here. I'm going to take these two screws out here, and then I'm going to take the screws out from the bottom of the chassis. So that's what I'm going to start and see if I can separate the chassis into two pieces. I'll also need to disconnect this pressure line here, and I'll probably take this section of the muffler off. Okay, so I've removed the 6 screws from the bottom of the chassis. I've removed the 2 screws right next to the servo. I've removed the servo horn, and the chassis is loose, but it still doesn't want to separate the plastic from the aluminum. So we need to see what's holding that in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the screws from the upper deck. Now, the problem that I think I'm going to run into is there's a screw right underneath this easy start motor here that you can't access easily unless we take the motor off, which we could do, but I'm going to see if just by loosening these or removing these screws here, if it gives it enough flex to separate. Okay, I've removed those screws. Let's give it a shot. Alright, there we go. We split it. We'll need to remove the fuel line. And then the unit is split in half. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set this rear section aside, and we'll work on the front. Now, I've already removed the front servo before I started this project, and the servo saver and the linkage that runs to the left and the right. So that's already out of there. So I'm just going to start tearing this down. I'm going to take the servo out. I've removed all the screws from the upper deck, and I've removed the servo, so I'll just lift this piece out and then remove the gas tank. Set the gas tank aside, set that upper deck aside. You won't need that anymore. The next step is just to remove the chassis from the bulkhead. And then you're just left with this bulkhead. You can set your old chassis aside. You won't need that anymore. Okay, now we're going to start reassembling the components to the new chassis. So we'll start with the front bulkhead, and we'll attach that to the front of the chassis. Once you've assembled the front bulkhead to the chassis, then we can move on and install the gas tank holder and the upper deck assembly. So the way we're going to go about this is to place the fuel tank holder on the chassis first. You want your servo mount to be on the right hand side of the vehicle. Then we're going to place the fuel tank in the holder. And then we'll place the deck assembly on top of it like that. And the deck assembly will automatically line the holder up with the screws in the chassis. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep this assembly together, and then we'll install the 2 front screws first. Then what you'll do is you'll install 5 screws. You'll install one here, 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 and here. But you will not install those there because there's a brace that needs to slide in between here. So you'll put those last two screws in later. And those two screws are going to be the two long screws. So you have these two long screws, and then you have a slightly shorter screw. Okay, since this is the first time I'm doing this, it's also a learning curve, and what I'm finding is that I'm going to be short a couple of screws. And I've also just noticed too that there's an additional screw hole there and a screw hole there that you're going to want to put a screw in. And I'm going to be short 3 screws, so I'll have to dig through my hardware bin and find some screws that fit that. So for the time being, what I'm going to do is, because this one's going to be hard to access, I'm just going to pop out one of these front ones, put it in the back there, and then I'll worry about these screws here later. Okay, so we've got the fuel tank mounted. We're missing a couple screws. That's no big deal. It's still loose from the bottom of the chassis. What we're going to do now is set this aside, and we're going to pull the motor off of the old chassis. Okay, so we've got our motor and transmission assembly. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to take out all the screws. And then we're going to want to pay attention to the size of the screws, the length of the screws. Any screw that goes into aluminum, when we reassemble that, we're going to want to put a little bit of Loctite on it. I made a little modification earlier on this car where I removed the rear battery holder that holds the AA battery. So you know, you'll know what to do. Just take that off and put it on the new chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart. Okay, I've removed the 4 small motor screws. There's a short one here, a short one there, and then there's 2 long ones there. Now I'll go ahead and remove the transmission. Okay, so when you're removing these last 4 screws that hold your A-arms on, underneath this block right here, there's a little shim. And this is basically an adjustable piece. I think you can get different variations of these. But essentially all it does is it adjusts your rear anti-squat. So you just want to pay attention to the orientation that it goes in. The thicker side goes towards the front of the vehicle. You can kind of see it's shaped sort of like a chisel. So this thick side goes towards the front. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. What we're going to want to try to do is sort of keep these together as an assembly, and then we're going to try to slide this assembly into the new chassis and get this support bracket here to slide in the tab, in this little tab here, and then once we get that in and everything in place, we can screw it down. Okay, looks like we're in. Everything looks good, so we'll put a couple of screws in. Okay, I've just got 2 screws in there to hold the transmission in place and hold the motor in place. I'm not worrying about using any Loctite yet. I want to get everything fit, and then after everything's good to go, I'll pull the screws out that go into the aluminum mounting points of the motor. I'll pull those out and put some Loctite on them. They don't have any Loctite on them from the factory, but they really should have some Loctite. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish putting all the screws in the bottom of this chassis. When you're installing the rear A-arms, again, make sure that the thicker section of this little chisel here is towards the front of the vehicle. Sort of set that on the pivot block there, and then what I'm going to use is like a little pick to help kind of line things up when you slide it in the transmission or in the chassis, and then try to get the screws through. Alright, just kind of giving it a quick once over. Everything looks in order. When you are putting it together, you want to make sure that your mesh is still good, and you don't need to adjust that or anything. Almost looks like my mesh has become a little bit looser. We'll keep an eye on that as I get all the rest of the hardware in. We'll see if it tightens up a little bit. I may need to adjust that. But everything looks good. So what I'm going to do is finish putting the rest of the bolts in the motor. So a little bit of blue Loctite. Alright, we got our transmission is bolted in place, our A-arms are bolted in place, we have all of our engine mounting screws in, and the ones that are going into aluminum, we're using Loctite. We have some miscellaneous screws here that need to be installed, but we're going to flip the vehicle over and take a look at the top side for a minute. Okay, so next up is where this transmission support bracket came in and notched underneath there. We're going to put those 2 screws in, and those are the longer screws. Okay, we've got those 2 screws in, and I'm noticing now that with most of our screws in place, the mesh has become just about perfect again. Go ahead and reconnect your fuel line. Okay, back to the bottom of the car. We're just going to basically put all the screws in that we can. Hopefully we have enough. Okay, like I said earlier, this is the first time I've done this, so it's a bit of a learning curve for me as well. I just noticed that I have a long screw left over, and that's actually going to go right there. So we're going to use a little bit of Loctite on it. Okay, So we've installed all the remaining screws that we have, and it looks like we're missing 1, 2. So we're short 2 of the small handhead screws, or countersunk screws. And then again, we were short a couple on the top here. I think we're missing 1, 2, 3 on the top side. So probably what I'll do is, again, just dig through my hardware and see if I can find some screws that will work. Alright, next we're going to reinstall our servo, our throttle and brake servo. When you install the servo, the correct orientation of the horn is like this, with the linkage crossing. And for the sake of the video, I'm not going to do it, but really you should just set the horn on it temporarily. Don't bother screwing it down or anything. Once you get your electronics hooked up, turn the vehicle on, make sure the servo is centered, and then place the servo horn on when you know it's centered. So I'm just going to go ahead and use 4 of these screws to reinstall the servo. Alright, we've got our servo mounted back up, throttle, brakes. Next we'll take a look at the muffler situation. Okay, so the muffler mounting point is a little bit different. So what I'll probably do is I may have to bend this slightly and drill a hole through the chassis for this screw to go into. It should be straightforward enough. I'm not going to do it right now, but that's probably what I'll do. Don't forget to reinstall your zip tie around the joint there on the exhaust. So you just go ahead and reinstall your pressure line. Okay, we're going to just set the vehicle aside for a moment. We're going to take out the original servo saver and turnbuckles, and we're going to remove the turnbuckle from the turnbuckle ends and then use the shorter turnbuckles. Once again, part number 1937. Now when you're doing the turnbuckles, the only thing I'll really say about this is you're going to have left hand thread and right hand thread, and you really want to try to reinstall the end on the corresponding thread. So the one I took off here is regular right hand thread, so I want to install that on regular right hand thread. This one here is going on left hand thread, I want to install that on left hand thread. Alright, I made up my 2 turnbuckles, and basically what I did is I just tightened each rod end down until I started feeling it giving me pretty good resistance. So they're basically more or less as short as they'll go right now. I'm going to put them on the car, and then I can adjust them accordingly to set the correct toe. On your original servo saver, you have to remove 2 bolts and their corresponding nuts that hold the 2 rod ends on. What I'm going to attempt to do is reuse these screws to go into the rack. So we'll see how that works out. Alright, reusing those screws worked well. If you want to be a little bit fussy, the proper orientation of turnbuckles is to have the left-hand thread facing the left-hand side of the vehicle. So I've got left-hand thread here, and then I've also got left-hand thread here. So that way when you are adjusting them, if you're turning one this way and you want to make the same adjustment on the other side, you're going to turn the other one in the same direction. It just makes it easier when you're adjusting turnbuckles. So I can definitely tell I'm running way too much toe out right now, so I'll have to lengthen these links a little bit, but that worked well. So all I need to do now is just reinstall the servo, put all the electronics back in it, and we are good to go. But that basically does it. Now you can see got a nice upgraded all aluminum chassis. Do have a couple little screws missing that I gotta find. Again, on the top, a couple little screws missing there. Gotta figure out a mounting system for the muffler. But aside from that, had all the parts I needed to do the conversion. So I hope this video helped. Didn't seem like there was a ton of Nitro Sport videos up right now, so maybe this will be some good information for you guys. I will be doing a upgrade series on this, because basically what I'm doing with this vehicle is getting ready to race it this summer. We're trying to reignite the interest in Nitro Stadium as a viable class, and it should be a lot of fun. So I got some good ideas for this. I've got some upgrade parts coming for it. Just basically going to try to make it race ready, more of a true stadium truck, get rid of those oversized wheels and stuff like that that come with the kit. So hope this chassis upgrade video helped you out, and keep updated for probably maybe 1 or 2 more videos on the Nitro Sport, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.